Hello, our viewers. This is WBC's special English edition. We will be discussing the deepening economic, political, as well as diplomatic crisis in Ethiopia, and it is Ramifications. I am today joined by Professor Abbas and Dr. Hussein from Canada, as well as Professor Mohammed from US. Please stay with us. Thank you for joining us today, our guests. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us, Aman.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Aman.
Thank you. Let me start from Professor Abbas. Professor Abbas, what is your analysis? The Abiy Ahmed government has formed a new government recently this October, at the beginning of this October. Are you satisfied, especially with the composition of his government, as well as the share of political power with different regional groups? And also, what can you say, especially about the composition of his cabinet at the federal level, considering the constitutions as well as the different composition in terms of religion, ethnicity, as well as gender?
Thank you, Aman, for giving us the opportunity to discuss this important issue. I think before we talk about the election and about the nomination of the government, we have to simply see how Dr. Abiy came to power. Dr. Abiy himself was not elected. He was the product of the Cairo revolution. So when the Tigrayan government, TPLF-led government, was weakened, he was propelled to power as a way of appeasing the Oromo population. He was meant to democratize. He was meant to open the political space, which was closed by the Tigrayans. So what many people were hoping that Abiy will simply liberalize, democratize the Ethiopian empire more than ever before. So what we see and what we have seen simply is a completely different story. Mr. Abiy came with the idea of liberalizing, but I think Mr. Abiy, without we knowing him, he simply came up with the idea of centralizing state powers, the idea of unitary state, the idea of eliminating, of course, what he called federal regions, because he apparently, without knowing him, of course, he had the political orientation which was aimed at restoring the glory of the past, which is simply dominated by the Amhara. So what we see is simply the marginalization of the main actors, including the Oromo Liberation Front, who was invited to come in, and the Oromo Federal Congress, and many other political organizations which are representing the Oromos. So you see, he extended the elections once under the pretext of COVID, and then he simply found another under different circumstances. He eliminated or he arrested the political opposition, and eventually he organized fake and democratic election. So when you look at, of course, the election he organized, it doesn't meet the basic criteria of any democracy. So first of all, then, because after arresting the political opponents and after demoralizing the oppositions, he organized elections. The election was not free. Now you have already a one-party state. That means he won 97%, and practically only the Bilsigna party or PP party winning, and all other minor parties were simply eliminated. So what we see here is that now Abiy wanted to simply create a government by him. He invited surrogate parties like Izema, and of course some individuals, because he didn't want to really have any party which is simply identity based. So what we see is in the nomination of the national government is simply the Abiy-dominated government, hand-picked individuals without representing really the Oromo people. So the Oromo do not feel really comfortable, do not feel that they are represented. The individuals are mostly surrogate. He was only Bilsigna party members. So when it comes to the federal level election, of course, is simply what the portfolios given to the Oromos are marginal. Do not mean much. And so the same thing can be said about the regional election. The regional election also was the victory won by the Bilsigna or Abiy's party. And therefore, basically what we can see is simply there is no election, there is no opposition political parties. He practically eliminated opposition forces by bribing them or by co-opting them. So I think what he is trying to do in the long run is simply not to have a meaningful, a strong political party to compete with him. So what we have is now is Abiy government, a unitary government, especially dominated by pro-unitary state, especially Abin, Amhara National Movement and the Party for Justice, represented by Birhanu, who is most reputed for not having sympathy for Oromo people. And therefore, when you look at, of course, when you check it all, the Oromo people have many, many reasons not to be happy, and they do not necessarily see Abiy government is representing them, and of course, incarnating their aspiration. So I think this is all we can say. I don't think that the Oromo are now feel that they are represented, and they remain quite silent for the coming 4 years, because they are not really clearly represented by regional level and national level. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Abbas. Professor Mohammed, let me come to you. Abiy Ahmed, like Professor Abbas mentioned, he came to power on the back of Oromo protests, the Oromo youth. He hasn't addressed the legitimate Oromo questions, the identity question, so the question of self-rule, human rights, as well as the economic questions. Would you think that the new government could address the questions of Oromo? Is there any hopes?
Thank you, Aman. As Professor Abbas said, Abiy Ahmed ran unopposed in many parts of Ethiopia, especially in Oromia. There were no opposition parties. The opposition figures that the Oromo people believe represent their views are in prison, like people like Jawar Mohammed and Bakala Garba. So from the get-go, Abiy Ahmed planned and executed this policy of marginalizing the Oromo and the people that represent their views. That's one. Two, the election itself, in addition to being unopposed, basically, there were no international observers. So Abiy Ahmed was also the judge of the elections. So how can someone be the judge of the elections when you are also a candidate? It doesn't work like that in international free and fair elections. So so that is the situation of the elections. Now, after Abiy Ahmed declared his party had won the elections, then he proceeded to form a government. Now, when you look at that government, it's really dominated. The key positions are dominated by the people who were not candidates in that election, who did not run in, especially in Oromia, in other regions. But those people ended up having key positions in government. People like Branu Naga and people, extremists from other nationalist parties. So I really, I have no illusion that this government will will answer the questions that were asked by the Cairo of Oromia when they were struggling against the former government from 2014 to 2018. Now, what are those questions? So to remind viewers what the questions raised by the Oromo people, these are not new questions. These are old questions, as old as the modern Ethiopian state, about 150 years ago. One is the issue of self-determination or self-rule and being in control of your natural resources. Now, that question, especially the issue of land, has not been settled. Land is bought and sold, and most landowners now in Oromia are people who have acquired those lands through corruption. So the biggest question is the question of land and self-determination. I have no illusion that this government would be able to answer those questions. The way the government is organized actually is to subvert the views of the Oromo people, and in a way that will not answer the questions raised by the Cairo of Oromo. So no, it will not be answered. In short, the questions will continue, the struggle will continue. Nothing has changed. Abiy Ahmed, before he became the new prime minister now, and Abiy Ahmed before that, really there is no difference at all, in my view. He is still the prime minister. It's not who occupies the office, it's the vision they have for the country. So that vision continues. It's a vision rejected by the people of Ethiopia in 1974. So Abiy Ahmed is a nostalgic view of the past, the glorious past, and this sinister politics that he introduced to the country is not fit to answer Ethiopia's deep questions. Not just a question of the Oromo, but every nation and nationality in the country has similar question: the question to self-rule, the question to be masters of their own destiny, the question to control their own resources. Those questions will continue because they haven't been answered.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed. Professor Dr. Hussein, in 2018, when Abiy Ahmed came to power, he came up with the idea of Madamar. Many of us were very happy, and many international political actors, including the international community, were supporting him. And but in the last 3 years, what he has been doing was very contradictory to the this Madamar synergy. And last 2 weeks ago, during the formation of the new government, especially on his inaugural ceremony, he came up with the idea of new beginnings or new chapters. What is your assessment, or what would you see in this new beginning, the idea of new beginning he has introduced during his coronation? Would you expect? Is there any hopes that you see in this idea?
Thank you, Aman. I think that question is, it's a very good one. Yes, I became, to power through popular resistance for people demanding, their rights. But he came with his own idea of, Madamar, which is, a simple term to represent something like synergy. Synergy, the idea wasn't bad, for a country which has mixed history from the past and a very, diversified views currently, trying to bring different views and, doing some kind of reconciliation with bad history, of the country. Wasn't a bad thing. It was a good start, and there are always, good things and bad things in a country, and picking the good aspects of the past and charting a common future that is helpful for the advancement of the country was the right choice. But at the end of the day, if you are, trying to govern a country of such diversity, you need to have a common understanding of even the philosophy that you put forward. You don't just, inculcate an outlandish view of your personal, vendetta on people's, various views. So you need to start with a dialogue. That philosophy could have started with a simple, participatory discussion with different stakeholders and their views about the past, their views about the current, and where they need to go. But if you just write a book without no discussion, no participation, and then publish that book, who knows who contributed to that book, and claim that as a party kind of manifesto, when that party was even kind of controversial the way it was formed, then you know that the beginning was bad. The process would be challenged. It would be rejected, and the implementation of that idea not even tested. So it was basically kind of rhetoric, narrative that the prime minister and the cronies around him propagated on, public media, and deafen the ears of the people. And I don't know. I haven't heard even now anybody talking about it. It was just a vogue once at the time, and then the drama was over, it was orchestrated, and people moved on. At the end of the day, the guy was trying to be crowned as a king. So the election was a kind of, coronation of, that's what they say, the coronation of the king to be. It was a means, it was a drama, it's a theater that was played, but badly played, actually, that resulted in, this bad outcome. Now, that Madamar was what people were talking at the beginning. So bringing different ideas, different views, taking, good aspects of the past, and then charting common future that is, pleasant to all. But nothing happened. So contrary to that, he was reinvigorating the past. He was rebuilding, reconstructing the emperors and the statues of emperors and kings, and he did that against the interest of the majority of people. Speaking from Oromo perspective, for example, when he renovated the palace and then put forward all these old statues and dust them off, and then even reconstruct them in a shiny way to show the glorious past, as they claimed. People were saying, what is this guy doing? Like, who is he trying to please? Who would be happy? So why did he start against the interest of people? So that was the question of almost all Oromos and other nations and nationalities. So that Madamar, the idea of Madamar that he tried to bring in through that process didn't go well. And now, coming to the process, the way it's organized, how they culled the, viable opposition parties, jailing their the leaders through pretextual, orchestration of reasons. Then the process was bad. The conduct was bad, and the outcome was expected, and people were not happy. They also now, like the Madamar thing, now they start talking about the new beginning. Look, what is the new beginning? A new beginning was expected to be the beginning of trying to resolve, history old problems, current problems, and looking about the future, and then doing the right thing. But what happened is got the continuation of false propaganda, media propaganda, and reiterating these words of new beginning without any substantive content. And now, where is it? Where is that beginning? Is it the beginning of a new political system, political ideology? No. Is it because a few opposition party members were sprinkled in the cabinet that makes it a new beginning? Or was there any reconciliation and national dialogue that is taking place to put the country on a different path? In the absence of all of this, it's again another rhetoric like the Madamar, just using the word out of context. So I don't see any difference. Even the opposition party members that are given some key positions are those who are despised by people. Look at Branu Naga. He had history. He changed political parties. I don't know, 9 times. I think people were counting. And this guy was controversial. He was against the interest of, the majority of people and the rights of, nations and nationalities. And then when you put such kind of people, in key political positions, such as the Ministry of Education, where education is the foundation of society, then you know that you are setting for failure. And he would be faced with a lot of resistance. And so, appointing such people is a recipe for disaster for the country going forward. Now we will talk about the war in a moment, but you are actually adding fuel to the fire through this kind of unreasonable, unrepresentative, and putting controversial people. So I remember 2 Izema people, one Brano Nagga, and then one guy in the Addis Ababa city administration. Those are key controversial people who spoke very bad against nations and nationalities. So we will have to see. I would say this.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein. Please try to be brief and to the point. With the time we have, we can cover all the points. So, having said this, Professor Abbas, especially in the formation of the new government, one of the questions of Oromo, especially during the TPLF regime, was the unfair share of political power. All the key government positions were controlled by the TPLF from one regional state. And do you see any changes, especially in the new composition of the newly formed government? Did you notice any fair share of the key government position in the new in the Abiy Ahmed government? And that's my first question. If you can briefly address to that question. And the second one is there are conflicts in all parts of Ethiopia, in Tigray, in Amhara, in Oromia, in Gambela, in Benshangul, including Afar and Somali. There are insurgent groups in Oromia, in Gambela, in Afar, as well as in parts of Amhara. What is your assessment regarding this conflict? Do you have any possible scenarios, especially by the new government of ending this war?
Thank you, Aman, for the question. And I know we mentioned earlier the Dr. Abiy government doesn't simply represent the Oromo people. He doesn't try. In the beginning, I think, as many of you know, he was presented as a son of a Bagada, to really teach Oromos. Then, of course, he played the Oromo card. And then he simply used, as Dr. Hussein rightly mentioned, he sugar-coated the assimilation, the Amhara agenda with Maddamar. By the way, as both said, this was not written by him. This was written for him by people like Birhanu Nagga, who in email leaked, says that I contributed to this Maddamar, which is simply a reactionary, backward-looking, which aimed at restoring old Ethiopia. So all Abiy was doing is simply he's backed by what you call in our language, by Naftanya elements. People simply hate other religions, other identities. Dr. Birhanu is one of them. I think he clearly said he is simply entered into politics because there are too many Oromos, and the Oromos will break up Ethiopia. By the way, to just add one point to this one, he is also responsible, according to many, in fomenting this conflict between Tigray and, of course, Ethiopia, because he was at the head of Gimbot and Azema. He simply engineered the war, which is simply never ending in northern Ethiopia. So that's why the American government, especially the Biden's executive order, targeted his party. So this person is ethically compromised to become the Minister of Education, where many people simply believe that their children will be emboldened with the right education. So Abiy was wrong to bring him there, so he will not succeed, he will not be accepted. And many Oromos, I'm sure, are looking forward to challenge any policy changes may be coming up. As far as the Oromo issue is concerned, I'm sure the Oromo are highly marginalized. One thing I think we have to know, our bright people, our simply educated people, who really many people believe, like Jawad, Bakale Garba, and also the leader of Oromo Liberation Front, people who are invited by him to come back are in jail. How on earth you simply can claim that you are representing the Oromo by arresting, of course, the best people we have? So that's really one important. The secondly also, even though he picked about 6 portfolios, all these portfolios are simply nothing. They are not really dealing with finance, with the military, with education, and so the Oromos are just simply there for decoration. For example, he brought someone who defected from OLF. His name is Kajela. So who we represent? Who is the Oromo people? So I think it's simply fake portfolio. So the Oromo do not necessarily believe they are really represented. Their interest will be served. The second important question, I think my colleagues, my friends will talk about this, is simply the conflict. Abiy came with the Iman of Peace. He was awarded naturally the highest Nobel Prize given in Sweden, the Nobel Prize. Simply this is a great honor for this. Now many people simply believe that Abiy simply will receive the award of the Worst Leader Award instead of this. So many people simply now surprised. How people didn't see this devil in him, who simply aimed at eliminating everyone who doesn't agree with him. So I think, as you mentioned, the whole thing started with his agenda. Already, one thing we have to know, since the Derg regime, Ethiopia was heading in the right direction when it comes to identities. There was a recognition of religious equality, and with the Tigrayans also a sort of federalism, which simply gives power to local communities speaking your language, practicing religion. So he came with the agenda of restoring of what you call nation state, unitary state, old Ethiopia. So that's why I think Dr. Hussein mentioned what they had to build Menelik and Haile Selassie. Actually, it's a way of making war against our people, against our memories. And so that is not enough, so he wanted to attack the federal system. I know the Amara, especially the centralists, do not want to see Ethiopia being decentralized. One of their complaints is simply the fact that Ethiopia became a federal system and they simply confined to the region. So Abiy came simply to embrace the agenda embraced by the Neftanya. So what he wanted to do is simply to eliminate an ethnic federal system. And so the only thing he wanted to do is simply to make sure that the Tigrayans are eliminated. When I say TPLF, so when I say TPLF, is simply the one which initiated the agenda, which we all support. Although we don't believe the Ethiopian federal version is not complete and good enough, so at least it was in the right direction. So what they wanted to do is simply to eliminate the potent force, which simply would challenge his centralized authority. So the war was simply mostly combined with the Eritrean interest, Neftanya interest for land, and their, of course, aspiration for revenge. He launched a war which was supposed to be swift and short. Unfortunately for him, this simply war now on the governments by creating, of course, all kinds of catastrophe, human rights abuse, economic crisis, diplomatic crisis, which we'll be addressing in more details. So that's one thing. The second aspect also now, he has emboldened the Neftanya system, the groups, who are really trying to fight against everyone who is opposed to the agendas. I think you will see one of the individuals who are really treating the Oromos, because he is simply trying to kill for the days of one Amhara, we'll kill 100 Oromos, and for 1 day of Amhara, we will kill 100 Gumus. And so he was basically trying to do what the Interhaumes were doing in Rwanda.
Professor Abbas, can you listen? We have a short video about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
አንድ አማራ ሲሞት 100 ገዳይ ይሞታል። አንድ ጉምዝ 100 አንድ አማራ ከገደለ 100 ጉምዝ እንገላለን። ኦሮሞ አንድ ኦሮሞ አንድ አማራ ከገደለ 100 ኦሮሞ እንገላለን። እኛ ሞትን ሳይሆን የታሪክ ተወቃሽነት ነው እንፈራው። የትናንትናው ታሪካችን የትናንትናው ማን ሳለን
Go ahead, please.
That is excellent video, because that is simply what actually the Rwandans did in Terhames did. I know, as I might mentioned, I wrote a chapter on Interhames, one chapter. This exactly starts this way, when they organized in 1991 by simply claiming we will kill all the Tutsis. The government tolerated, the government backed it, the government of Habyarimana backed it. And then they created an incident eventually to provoke the Rwandan genocide, which killed about between 800 and 1 million people. So one of the saddest things, of course, now is simply Oromos are persecuted under the cover of Shane, and also the government is simply doesn't do anything against extremist groups, of course, who simply foment conflict and who openly launch an attack against the Oromos. I think one of the saddest things is also there is a media which the government doesn't say called Ashara, which is simply forecasting this one, and there is also other media, national media, who do not say anything. So these people simply doing this. Eventually, this, if just continues, if nothing is done, eventually that will lead to intercommunal conflict. And now, as many of you know, there is already conflict ongoing, as you rightly mentioned, in Wallaga region, Eastern Wallaga, where of course 11 people were killed, massacred by these extremist people in a few days ago. And of course, there is, of course, always killings, systematic killings in Afar, in Karayu, in Wollo, in different places. So I think one of the saddest thing, of course, Abiy mean to bring about peace and the unity, or Madamar, what is simply doing is simply to continue to simply create a situation where a possible genocide worse than that of Rwanda will happen, because he is actually backing this, and he's encircled, or he was advised by extremist group. And if this continues, unfortunately, the current conflict will expand, and perhaps it may lead to a deadly conflict. I think this is simply my fear.
Thank you, Professor Abbas. Professor Mohammed, regarding the human rights abuses in different parts of Oromia since the Abiy Ahmed government came to power, his military as well as security forces has been committing various forms of human rights abuses as well as extrajudicial killings. What is your assessment on this? And also, recently, the Amara militias crossed the border into western part of Oromia. They killed, as to some reporters from the area, about some reporters say it's 20, some reports 31 people, civilians, of course, and also the Oromia Special Forces killed by shooting live bullet 2 Oromo arrows in southern Oromia. What is your assessment in overall human rights abuses as well as extrajudicial killings committed by the new government? And also, the second question is, what is your take, especially on the fate of prisoners of conscience and as well as Oromo political prisoners who are languishing in jail?
Thank you, Aman. When it comes to human rights, the Abiy government, human rights is not at the top of their list. We can mention incidents after incidents where the human rights of individuals and communities is violated. For example, in Dambidorlo, a few months ago, a young Oromo kid by the name of Emmanuel was executed in public, in broad daylight. In Borana, I think we have that video recently, a few days ago, 2 young Oromos were executed. And there is a video circulating on social media showing the killing of these 2 youngsters. So human rights, even though Abiy Ahmed claims he declared war on Tigray because they would not respect the rule of law, the government in Ethiopia does not respect the rule of law. That everybody knows. The international community, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, they have all written about the human rights record of the Ethiopian government. It's not good. But more importantly, the people of Ethiopia know the government does not respect their rights. Killings are a norm in Ethiopia, really. It's not an aberration. An aberration is something that happens every once in a while. Killings, taking people out of prison and executing, it's a daily occurrence in Ethiopia. So human rights, even though to deceive the international community, they always talk about human rights, but everybody knows now the international community has caught up to them. They know they violate human rights. They have always been violating human rights. They don't respect human rights. That's not at the top of their priorities. At the top of their priority is survival. So the end for them justifies the means. To stay on power, they will do anything, including killing of young kids, teenagers. If we go a few years back, as you remember, because the reason I'm saying that is because this government is a continuation of the old. In Dambidolo, we all remember a mother was ordered to sit on the dead body of her son. And everybody saw it. There is a video circulating on social media. I have downloaded that video. I have it. So human rights violation is in Ethiopia the norm. It happens every day. The rights of people are not respected. Your life is not guaranteed. The primary function of a government is to guarantee the right to life. That's the number one job of any government. But in Ethiopia, your life has no guarantee. You really don't know when you leave the house in the morning if you will come back home in the evening, because you don't know who is doing these things. There are groups that are armed, like in Wallaga now, you mentioned more than 10 people were killed. By who? By these armed groups coming from the Amhara state who are enabled by this government. So this government really, the human rights of people is not at the top of their list. We have said this in the past. The problem is they have an agenda, okay? To have their agenda come to fruition, they will work with the devil, including people who are not part of the regular army, but who are armed and who are roaming the countryside, killing people who they believe are their enemies. Now that is what happened in Wallaga. But if you have that video, Aman, you can show the two Oromo youngsters killed in I think it's in Borana.
Yeah.
It's really sad. Some reports indicate those two guys were in jail. So they took them out of jail into this area, and they executed them. They did not pick up their bodies, and they were standing on the dead bodies, dead and dying, and they were talking to each other. Kill him, he's not dead. Fire another bullet into him. Kill him, finish him off. So this is the situation we are in. Abiy Ahmed and his government did not say anything about this. They did not come out and condemn this action by his security forces. They did not condemn it. So that shows to me that they have something to do with that, because they cannot deny it. So they chose to be silent. So our people have put up with this kind of nonsense for many years. So human rights for Abiy, it's just a lip service. When it's convenient and he's trying to deceive the West, he pulls that card, human rights. That's how we got the Nobel Peace Prize. We knew from the get-go this guy was a fake. He faked his way to the Nobel Peace Prize. And eventually his true self was revealed, because you can only hide for so long. You cannot hide forever. You cannot hide who you really are forever. And who Abiy really is a guy that doesn't care about human rights, that would do anything to stay in power, that would kill, that would do anything. So that's Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia. There is no human rights. Many people now in the diaspora, they are really scared of going to Ethiopia. Why? Because Abiy Ahmed, in addition to his regular army security apparatus, he has people who are armed and who are paramilitary and who kill people. They just move around the country and execute people, and nobody says anything. The government will not say anything. You can't complain to anyone. If you do, you would be arrested and thrown in jail. So Ethiopia right now is really not a good place. This is the worst we have seen yet. Now, when it comes to the fate of political prisoners, the question we need to ask is, why were they arrested in the first place? Okay, so the arrest of prominent political figures like Jawar Muhammad and Bakala Garba is really similar. It's tied to the war Abiy Ahmed started in Tigray. So they had a vision, like I said earlier, a nostalgic vision of Ethiopia. They wanted to take Ethiopia back to what they claimed was the glorious past. As we know, Professor Abbas is a professional historian, okay, scientific history. Now, as we know, Ethiopia does not have a glorious past. The history of Ethiopia is, it's 150 years, roughly. The modern state of Ethiopia is a history of subjugation, where people are reduced to serfdom on their own land. Now, which Ethiopia does Abiy Ahmed want to take the country back to? That's the question. Now, in his quest to take the country back to what he claims is the glorious past, Abiy Ahmed would do anything to eliminate the people he believes stand in his path. So Jawar Muhammad, Bakala Garba, and other Oromo politicians, he believes stand in his way. So he arrested them. He eliminated some people like Jalu Hundesa. And then he declared war on Oromia first. People tend to forget. Abiy Ahmed declared war on the Oromo people first, and then he expanded the war to Tigray. As Professor Abbas said, some of the people that hold high offices right now are the ones that advised Abiy Ahmed to strike at Tigray. Now, Abiy Ahmed declared victory weeks after he started the war. Not only has the war not ended, it has continued, and the TDF has managed to push the front line out of Tigray into Amhara and Afar. According to the latest now, they are winning the war. The Tigrayan forces are winning the war. So Abiy is fighting an unjust war. The people of Tigray had no choice but to protect themselves. They're fighting for survival. So the fate of political prisoners depends on the pressure people put on Abiy Ahmed, because the people who advised, just like they advised him to strike at Tigray, they also advised him to arrest Jawar Muhammad and Bakala Garba and others. There are thousands that we don't know in all in the whole country. So will they be released? It depends. Okay, if the political pressure, political and military pressure is come to bear on him, then he might succumb to the pressure. But right now, their fate is really at the hands of the people. Abiy Ahmed would not voluntarily release them because the people, his cheerleaders, are now holding key positions, and they don't want Jawar and the rest released because they feel they have been defeated by idea. Now, when you are defeated by the war of ideas in the marketplace for ideas, you resort to force. So Jawar Muhammad is a victim of that. Bakala Garba is a victim of that. Abiy Ahmed has lost the battle of ideas. He resorted to war, intimidation, and killings, and so on and so forth. So I hope at some point these prisoners will be released. We know they are in the hands of the government. If anything happens to them, the government is responsible. After all, the buck stops with Abiy, and I hope enough pressure will come to bear on Abiy, and he would succumb to pressure coming from the people.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed. With the time we have 25 minutes from now. Please try to make it short, Professor. Thank you, Professor Mohammed. Let me come to Dr. Hussein. Dr. Hussein, the diplomatic relationship between the Ethiopian government and the Western countries, especially the United States and the European country, has been deteriorating from time to time. What is like the major causes of this deterioration, if you can address to that, as well as can the Ethiopian economy withstand this the diplomatic crisis, especially this countries, basically the United States as well as the European country, has been financially as well as materially helping Ethiopia during good and bad times. What is your take on this one? And also appreciate if you can summarize the briefly, if you can briefly summarize the human rights abuses Professor Mohammed and Professor Abbas has reacted. If you can also, if you have some point to say on that, that would be great too.
Okay, thank you, Aman. Yeah, so as you know, as well as it's well known, since Abiy Ahmed came to power, as we talked earlier, the beginning was a kind of good momentum, but then he was glorified up to the reception of the 2019 Nobel Prize in peace. And then he started reversing that and basically squandering the opportunity he was given on the world stage. So, winning a Nobel Peace Prize, which is a very, honorary, award, it was an opportunity. It was it was an opportunity to be used for the betterment of the country, the betterment of humanity, the promotion of peace and security, and the advancement of the economy and so on. But to the contrary, what happened was he started backpedaling on the promises he made at the reception of that Nobel Prize. And he started, fueling the internal conflict. He didn't play a vital leadership role. The role of a leader is to bring together even different views in the country and chart the country on the right path. But he did to the contrary, and he parted with some, and he promoted some ideas and rejected some ideas. For example, one of the ideas he was against was what is called the Oromuma. This is where the Oromo people bring together their their different aspirations and then chart together what need to happen through promotion of self-awareness and self-motivation. But he started working against that, and therefore the conflict started. He also started rhetorics against the against the TPLF, and then moved away from the coalition and formed a new prosperity party, excluding them. Exclusion is really a bad thing because, no matter how how less powerful the excluded is, regrouping and striving for the cause would strengthen, because if you have the sense of being excluded, that creates a kind of energy, and then regrouping, and so all the steps he took wasn't about bringing the national reconciliation and putting the country on the right path, but he did the opposite, and therefore the conflicts got aggravated, and the international community was watching what was unfolding in the country, and that conflict led to the war that started basically about a year ago. So November was, we are now in October. Come this November is almost a year for the war in Tigray. So at the time, he was saying the war was a low enforcing operation that could take only a few weeks. But here we go. We are almost a year. Now the war is completely devastating in terms of its cost. It's now full-fledged war. Battling parties are claiming, they are strengthening themselves and they are claiming victories. Now drones and heavy artillery are involved. There are huge casualties in terms of human life, property, destruction of institutions. The cost on the economy is huge. It's now in billions of dollars. Without even calculating the indirect cost on the economy, even the direct cost, the cost of war, the cost of these weaponaries and artillery, machine guns, and so on, those are really huge. The indirect effect, people are not at peace, and when there is conflict and when people are not feeling secure, there is no production, there is no distribution of goods and services. There is no real economic activity. All what the war is doing is consumption of existing resources and destroying existing resources. So the war is really costing human life. It's creating disaster. So human rights abuses are to the maximum. So international community has been putting a lot of pressure on the government, but the government, was not willing to work towards a solution. Now, this diplomatic roles went from bilateral to multilateral. The European government, bilaterally, and then European Union, then the U.S. government bilaterally, and then now at the UN level, including expulsion of the UN workers in the country, the aid workers in the country. So all those diplomatic roles are leading to sanctions. So these sanctions are going to be tough. One of the key areas of sanction is where, let's say, Ethiopia has trades with the rest of the world. A case in point is AGOA. This is a free trade opportunity for Ethiopian manufacturers and exporters. Based on this, advantage, this opportunity, Ethiopia has set up a lot of industrial park and business parks where some investors have come to the country and invested. So, for example, in the areas of textile and apparel, they are exporting to U.S. market, but now consideration is being made to ban, to discontinue that opportunity, the AGOA, It's not yet decided, but it's on the verge of being decided, and that would cost the Ethiopian economy hugely. The rough estimate is about 1 million jobs. So 1 million jobs, poor, children and women who are working in those factories and in those, small businesses are now at the mercy of this. So as you can see, even the government was reacting to that. 1 million job, if you can assume behind those 1 million employees are families, and those families are being supported. So let's say if one employee was supporting about 4 or 5, then we are talking about 5-6 million people being supported by this. Now the impact of all these sanctions, not only this but also others, such as the stoppage of aid money coming, and many other diplomatic pressures are putting the country in the bad position. As you can see, recently the credit rating agencies have also downgraded the country from what they call the B+ to the zones of Cs, the bottom part of Cs. These are credit score agencies are independent agencies who assess the risk of a country in borrowing money externally, and that's creating a lot of pressure on the economy, because the cost of borrowing is now significantly higher than what the country can afford to pay back, and that is even when they can borrow, because now Ethiopia is risky. And the World Economic Outlook recently put out a forecast. The forecast for Ethiopia was made blank, and the reason they were giving on the report was that Ethiopia is unusually on high uncertainty. So this has been for the first time in the country's history. Even other countries such as Somalia and those war-torn areas have forecast of some sort, but Ethiopia now in this bad situation. And I could only say that this is a crisis in leadership. So the Abiy government seems to be working against the interests of the Ethiopian people. This is not good for Ethiopian people, and a government who is supposed to be answerable to the people should listen to the interests of the country and interests of the people. But he is out of touch with reality. When, for example, the war is raging in the northern part, he is roaming around in the opposite side of the country, visiting farms of wheat and vegetable farms. This is kind of deceiving. The leadership should be very concerned about the huge macroeconomic issues rather than sectoral issues such as visiting a farm when the problem is really high. And I think the economy is suffering a lot. As you know, the cost of living is soaring. Inflation is really bad in the country. People are now at the verge of starvation. Already famine is, man-made famine is happening in the north. Human rights abuses, you already mentioned, my colleagues have already talked about it. It's going from bad to worse. And this is mainly lack of good governance, good leadership, not accountability for the people, but pursuing self-interest. So I would say the country is heading towards bad, situation. I think the international community should continue putting pressure to stop this unruly government taking the country to the worst situation. It is already bad, but the worst situation. And people are even talking about now what is called Ethioslavia. This is like the the Yugoslavia of the 1990s. So the country is on the verge of disintegration. The war is raging. Each side is claiming a victory, but the reality must be somewhere. And we know that the signs are already on the board, that one side is gaining momentum, but the other side, which is the government side, is weakening. And if you can't see this sign and then come to the negotiating table, then who are you as a leader? And you would be accountable. And the world is not going to let this to happen. So diplomatic pressure will continue, sanctions would continue, the government would be crippled, and things need to be reversed, I would say. Aman.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein. I know you have to leave in 10 minutes. If you have to leave, you are excused to leave. If you can, will stay with us too until the end of the program. That would be okay too. And the last points you mentioned are actually my next questions. Thank you for addressing to those points. Professor, my last question for Professor Abbas and Professor Muhammad, Dr. Hussein said, what are especially the problems Ethiopia has been facing the last 3 years since the Abiy Ahmed government came to power was very complicated. Some of the problems were unprecedented in their multi-layers, political, economic, military, as well as diplomatic crisis. What are the ramifications of the overall problems on the economy as well as the social fabrics, the diplomatic relationship we have with Western nations? What is your assessment on this, Professor Abbas, and then Professor Mohammed?
Thank you, Aman. So I think Professor Dr. Hussein clearly addressed many of the issues you raised.
Sorry to interrupt you. And also, if you can address too why the Abiy Ahmed government, many international actors, the domestic as well as the international political actors as well, and allies of Ethiopia, has been insisting the Abiy Ahmed government to organize all-inclusive national dialogue. Why the government and its collaborators have been refusing not to organize the national ceasefire and organize an all-inclusive national dialogue? If we can address to that point too, I appreciate that.
Thank you. So first of all, I think I will add one point to the issue of human rights. I know one of the things which have been mentioned often about Abiy government in this war was simply the rape against women. This is simply an important issue in international relations, and the Abiy government potentially will be accused of rape as weapon, and also hunger as weapon, because apparently because of his refusal of giving access to humanitarian relief. And I think one day, I think it is possible if, say, 100,000 people die, or 50,000 people die, or 10,000, he may be accused of using hunger as weapon. And of course, this is already on agenda. Many women were raped by the Eritreans, by the Amhara militias, by the Ethiopian army. That also a serious problem. So when it comes to the economy, I think the most important point you look at is simply the Ethiopian economy is very, very fragile, very, very weak already. I looked at Human Development Index this morning. Ethiopia is 173 out of 189. That is among the poorest of the poor already. And Ethiopia only exports Ethiopian export and import is only 28% of the GDP, which is among the lowest. That means it is a country which is based on foreign aid, whether it's bilateral or multilateral or simply what you call common pool. There are three types of aid Ethiopia was receiving. One is one government to one government, which is called bilateral. The second one is multilateral, coming from UN, European Union, and of course the World Bank. And the third one is, of course, what you call common pool, which is given by voluntary governments such as Sweden, Denmark, and so on. Now, by deteriorating, by simply creating a clash with the West. He is the pride of all this money. There is no doubt many Western governments are not generous. They may be giving some humanitarian aid, but they are not ready to give development assistance. Imagine a country which simply puts only export and import, which may be compromised, as Dr. Hussein said, because of the sanction. And then, of course, this country will not earn foreign money. So, which is simply a major problem. One of the issues I think that many people do not realize is this country is going downward. One of the scary forecasts of Ethiopian economy is not only growing, but the Ethiopian population is growing by how many much? For example, it's estimated in 10 years, the Ethiopian population will reach 145 million, 140, which cannot create jobs, which cannot give any hope. Of course, if the war continues, the economy simply doesn't simply grow anymore. So that's why I think you cannot simply have any hope with this government. One of the problems I think with Abiy government is simply this person is irrational or immature to become a leader. So how you can shoot on your foot by simply attacking the United Nations, a major agency responsible for Ethiopian development, Ethiopian economic growth, how you can simply fight against historical allies of Ethiopia, the United States, Western European nations. And so by simply waging war against them, therefore he is simply waging war against national interests. One of the issues I think which is mentioned, by fighting against the United States, for example, the Ethiopian debt is simply estimated at $3 billion. $3 billion. Ethiopia has to go to the IMF to renegotiate, to reschedule this debt, but then this comes to the United States. America is simply the one who simply has more than 60% of shares of vote. So, as you rightly mentioned, I think Ethiopia doesn't have any ally internationally except Isaias and the Uganda's president and the Somalian president, who do not represent much for Ethiopia, but they are simply creating more problems for him. So I think this is simply a major problem, I think, when it comes to international relations. But I think Ethiopia is normally, at least historically, repeated as one of the major African nations with the largest population, located in very important strategic location. And as such, it was sought after. Now, after this, I think Ethiopia has become a pariah state. When you simply expel NGOs, the United Nations, when you simply create such kind of situation, now it is simply facing a serious sanction. I don't know what kind of sanctions you are imposing, because Europeans already said, unless you negotiate, unless you in this conflict, they will impose the embargo, the sanction. The Americans, of course, the Biden administration already clearly said he will simply put the executive order which will be in place. So I think one of the problems I think we have already on the bad economy situation with inflations, and we work inside, not inside. So how this country can be simply continuing. So I think one of the problems with Abiy is simply he's mixing religions, mythologies, and legends. He says Ethiopia was created by Ethiopia Amlak, and they will be kept by Ethiopian Amlak. That's not the case. At the same time, he's promising us Ethiopia will not break down, but simply all what he's doing is simply to contribute to the collapse of the Ethiopian state. I think when you look at all the indicators, internal security, domestic security, we mentioned, and external relation, diplomatic relation, the country simply doesn't seem to have any kind of hope to continue as viable state. Simply it is, or at least collapsing the state or failed the state. When it comes to the last one, I think the only way I think out of this, I think from international community perspective, from anyone's perspective, is simply to end this conflict by negotiation. But the problem with this is simply the Tigrayans also are not willing to accept the mediation of Mr. Obasanjo, because they feel he is compromised, he is pro-Ethiopia, they don't sit down around with him. The Abiy government also doesn't want, because they wanted to win. The supporters, Amhara, do not want to give any kind of compromise, any kind of compromise. I think any kind of incentive for the Tigrayans to come to the negotiating table, because for them they have to win in order to restore the old Ethiopia. But the Tigrayans will not come to the negotiating table unless some conditions are met. I don't know what this condition will be acceptable, not acceptable. But anyways, the Amhara are not willing to make any compromise. They do not want to see the Tigrayans even to be alive, because according to some, they wanted to eradicate their ideas, as their philosophy, and anything related to the Tigrayans. So I think Abiy is not really in a position to negotiate with anybody. I know one of the things, I think Abiy is not autonomous. He doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't have a policy. He is manipulated by, of course, the clergy, people who do not understand how economy functions and how the international relation functions, and simply they wanted to simply want to see him winning. So I don't know what kind of inclusive dialogue in this condition, because Abiy feels that he won the election and he simply wanted to be in the saddle to impose his own wish. But I think many people, whether we are Oromos or Tigrayans, any southern people, do not want to simply him imposing his views. They want to sit down how to simply move the country forward. I know it's very, very difficult. I don't know how this will end, but I think Abiy will face that sanction because unless he ends, I think Europeans are determined. The Americans, in the end, of course, they have to take that action. That is the only way to end this conflict. I think I have to stop. I think Professor Mohammed has a lot to add on this.
Okay, thank you. Professor Mohammed, if you have points to add on that, I'll give you the chance. And with that, we will conclude the show.
Thank you very much, Aman. The two gentlemen have concluded it pretty well. So I'll just add some points. The first point I would add is economic growth in Ethiopia now is predicted to be in the negative. So the Ethiopian economy is contracting. That's one. And the reason for that is, number one, because there is lack of peace and stability in the country. And as we all know, economic growth or economic function needs peace and stability, and Ethiopia lacks that. The second one is economic growth is also a function of investment. So investment can come from domestic savings or from other countries through foreign direct investment. So since in Ethiopia, as I said, there is no peace, Ethiopia does not attract foreign direct investment. Number three, there is a shortage of hard currency in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is really stretched because they import medication, food, fuel. So Ethiopia spends a lot of money, its hard currency, on imports. Now there is a shortage of imports. So a shortage of something would lead to higher prices. Now in Ethiopia, two things are leading to higher price. That is inflation. One is there is a limited supply coming from other countries. That's one, because of lack of a shortage of hard currency. The second one is there is a huge increase in government spending. As we know, when government spending increases, the value of money drops. That's the second source of inflation. The third one is there is less demand for the Ethiopian currency, the birr. There is a huge supply of the birr, but the demand for birr is not that much. Why? Because if you think about where the demand for the birr that mitigates that falling value of the birr is coming from, it is coming from people visiting Ethiopia from other countries. Now, if you have the dollar, when you visit Ethiopia, you take your dollar there and you exchange it for the Ethiopian birr. So you are supplying the dollar, which means in buying birr. So that increases the demand for birr, and that acts as a mitigating force when it comes to the falling value of birr. That is increasing prices. Now, the other point is Ethiopia gets a lot of money from the West in the form of budget support. Now, most of that money has stopped. So Ethiopia cannot even cover their budget right now because it was coming from the US and mostly from the IMF and from the European Union. So all of that has almost stopped. So Ethiopia is in trouble that way too. So because of all of these, the Ethiopian economy, according to the IMF, which they said really was not easy to project. They are projecting a contraction of the Ethiopian economy. So growth will be negative. Now, when it comes to AGWA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So Ethiopia, that act, I was actually here when that was signed into law by George Bush. So this AGWA is predicated on that country respecting human rights. So it's written into law. There are provisions in there. If you violate human rights, then America, the United States, can take that privilege away from you. So what's happening right now in Ethiopia is there is a gross human rights abuse in Ethiopia, and we have seen the Ethiopian Airlines. This is a CNN report. Ethiopian Airlines transporting weapons for the Ethiopian government. That was a CNN report. Now, when you do things like that, then you don't qualify for this privileged status, which is being able to export goods to the U.S. duty free. So that's a big deal for Ethiopia. Now, the representative, the U.S. trade representative, Catherine Tai, has indicated that they might take away that privileged status from Ethiopia. If that happens, then Ethiopia cannot export goods to the U.S. duty free. Now, that's a big deal because the cost of production is low or lower than Ethiopia in many countries. So in that case, then Ethiopia cannot sell to anybody else but the U.S. So this is a big deal. But what the Ethiopian government is saying through their spokeswoman, Belene Suyum, is that it's tantamount to begging, saying, there are women working in those industries, and if the U.S. takes away this privilege, those women will go back to their villages, and they would be subject to forced marriages and so on and so forth. It's really shameful. What the U.S. is saying is stop the war and negotiate peace. That's it. So they don't want to address that. Now they talk about how the U.S. Through its policies would be hurting women. So that is not really acceptable by many people. Now, when it comes to the U.S., Ethiopia's credit rating, Standard & Poor S&P has dropped it to triple C plus. It was B minus. So any way you look at the Ethiopian economy, it's hurting. That's really what I can say. Now, when it comes to the diplomacy, we all know Ethiopia has been isolated. Ethiopia really doesn't have a friend. In the realm of diplomacy, friend is always subject to flipping and change. So someone who is your friend now may be your adversary in the future. So the way Ethiopia plays diplomacy is really shameful. Like Russia is not your friend forever. When the interests of Ethiopia and Russia coincide, they will support you. Otherwise, they will pursue their self-interest. Now, the way the Ethiopian media was talking about the support of Russia, India, and China is as if they have some kind of kinship and they can expect unqualified support from Russia. That's not true. That shows you how much they don't know what diplomacy is. The last point is the dialogue. Why refuse to sit down and negotiate peace with armed groups? Is because Abiy and his cronies, for them, this is a zero-sum game. So they believe there is no win-win situation. If they negotiation means they get something and you get something. They give up something and you give up something. Now, Abiy Ahmed and his advisors don't want to give up anything. They have a vision for Ethiopia, and that vision is not shared by the vast majority of the Ethiopian people. Now, if they open that up to negotiations, they know that is not acceptable. So they want to make it a reality through force. So that is why they are refusing to negotiate peace with TDF and the Oromo Liberation Army, in my opinion, Aman.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed. I'm not sure how many minutes Dr. Hussein has. If he have some minutes, I can give you a chance. And also, one question that's forwarded from our audience. In many occasions, several occasions, Abiy Ahmed appeared on public stages. He was talking about African problems. African problems needs African solutions, and his mainstream medias has been spreading anti-Western rhetoric. What is your take on this point, Dr. Hussein? And I appreciate if you can summarize the last, the whole, the program, the show.
Thank you, Aman. Yeah, I don't have a lot of time, but I have some 2 minutes. So you just raised the African solution for African problems. Listen, Abiy was the first to reject the Africans when the conflict started a year ago, and he didn't even pursue the some of the what they call the glorious past, where Emperor Haile Selassie was the founder of the this African partnership, African solidarity. The Africans were, other African countries were friends of Ethiopia diplomatically. So that's why they proposed at the time, I think sent three heads of state, former heads of state, to him to negotiate before, the war that's now costing billions of dollars. But he didn't listen to them, like he didn't listen to other international, stakeholders. Now, when things got out of, touch, meaning when the problem really raged, and when disaster occurred, when human suffering, happened, the only last resort for him was to come back to that African brotherhood and, seeking support from Africans. Just to mention one very surprising event was when he was celebrating the inauguration of his premiership. He invited many people, I think, but it turned out to be only a few African neighbors who showed up. And it was a surprise that even his friend in war, the Eritrea's dictator Isaias Afwerki, didn't even show up, and that was really surprising. So, like Professor Mohammed mentioned earlier, friends at one time could be adversaries on the in the other time. I think that was the beginning of the deterioration of the relationship between these two parties. Now, with coming back to African solution for African problems, I think that was triggered by the UN's Security Council deliberation on the GERD, where Egypt took the problem to that stage, and that stage returned back the solution to the African table. And so one big lesson which he learned through hard way, first involving others and then looking out to others, and when he got slapped on the face on that, then he had to come back to the friends who were actually coming to his rescue at the beginning. But I think it was too late. I think there is less Africans can do now to solve Ethiopia's problem. Ethiopia's problem is now mainly, on the hands of the government. If the government is willing to negotiate, international community would help. But if that is not the case, then I think they are subject to, the consequences, which is already, disastrous. But international pressure will continue, and things will have to, I think, reset to, and then the Ethiopian people should also step forward to ask its government, we call it as government, to respond to the need for negotiation and dialogue. And I think that's the only solution I can see. The Africans can help, but an opportunity was missed at the beginning, is my take on this.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein. With that, we will conclude the show. Thank you for sharing, for liking, and subscribing to our channels, Professor Abbas and Dr. Hussein from Canada, Professor Mohammed Tairo from US. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your perspective and expertise on the political, economic, as well as diplomatic crisis of Ethiopia. That's the end of the show. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aman, for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always great to have you.
Malaya kormako mal magana tantari sirbinan sirbi malaya